Our scripture reading is Luke 5, 1 through 11. It's on page 1076 in your pew Bibles. It's entitled Jesus' First Followers. One day, while Jesus was standing beside Lake Galilee, many people were pressing all around him to hear the word of God. Jesus saw two boats at the shore of the lake. Their fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Jesus got into one of the boats, the one that belonged to Simon, and asked him to push off a little from the land. Then Jesus sat down and continued to teach the people from the boat. When Jesus had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Take the boat into deep water and put your nets in the water to catch some fish." Simon answered, "Master, we worked hard all night trying to catch fish, and we caught nothing. You say to put the nets in the water, so I will." When the fishermen did, as Jesus had told them, they caught so many fish that the nets began to break. They called to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. They came and filled both boats so full that they were almost sinking. When Simon Peter saw what had happened, he bowed down before Jesus and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." He and the other fishermen were amazed at the many fish they caught, as were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." When the men brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and they followed Jesus.
Good morning. One of my sister's favorite proverbs, not in the Bible, but a proverb anyway, is partial obedience is really just full disobedience. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but that's something that my sister really tries to live by. And I think there's a lot of truth to that sometimes there can be things that we really should be black or white about, things that can hold us back, or where a partial obedience looks like a slippery slope to go off in the wrong direction. There's also a kind of partial obedience that I think is moving toward more complete obedience. And I think on the other side of it, that's a good thing. That's something that should be celebrated and encouraged and something that we hope will thrive. Sometimes we need to just begin again right where we're at. And coming from the recovery side of things, for me, I recognize that perfection is pretty hard to reach. And things don't have to be perfect before they can get started. And if I waited until things were perfect before they got started, not a whole lot of things would ever get done. And I believe that some things are so important that they're worth doing badly. Because the only way that we'll ever do them right is to do them badly and figure out the lessons that we need. Some things are too important to get wrong. We're going to start a series that starts today. It's a topical series, not something I normally do, but it's a topical series called Together on the Jesus Way. And I want to talk today about calling. That's where a lot of these things all begin, with that call from God. And I want to unpack a few lessons from this story of Peter's calling that I see are pertaining to calling for all of us in general. But first, you might be asking, what is it that Christians mean when they talk about calling? I think there's two parts to calling as it's commonly understood by Christians. And the first part of that statement is who is doing the calling. God is doing the calling. It's not something that we choose, it's something that God chooses. And God calls us to a unique service in the mission of the church. So our service is work, right? The word vocation that we often use to describe work is the Latin word for calling. And today it's been largely divorced from its Christian origins and its Christian understanding of everyone having something that God is calling them to do. Some way of fitting into the joyous work that we have. And now we use that term as if it applies to any work, with or without the direction of God. But what is meant by calling in a Christian sense is basically our lived response of doing what we were made for, and doing it to the best of our understanding of what God's direction for us is. And in our scripture today, we see two plans on display. we see Peter's plan for his life, and we see Jesus' plan for Peter's life. In Jesus calling Peter, we see Peter come to that point of laying down his own plans, and quite literally laying down some of his possessions and walking away, and taking it up Jesus' plan for his life, and chasing it in all the mystery that is found in that. And I believe that God has a calling for each and every person. But some never come to that place of recognizing that calling. They never come to that place of listening for God's voice and waiting for God's direction. And I wonder why that is. And I think a lot of this has to do with obedience. And it has to do with our attitude toward obedience. When I was a kid, my mom used to play this game. I don't know if I've never really played it with my kids, but I think it's called Hot and Cold or something like that. And there's something out there, usually in the house, and as you walk away from it, there's all these descriptions that, kind of describe coldness. Colder, ice cold, frozen, you keep moving farther away. You're going the wrong way, and so you keep hearing these descriptions about things that are cold. And then when you start heading in the right way, you start hearing like warmer, boiling hot, on fire, and then you find that thing that's out there. And there's a process. It's not just us looking around for something. There's this voice telling us where to go. And there's something that's surprising that we're going to find if we listen to that voice. And if we let our actions respond to that voice, that calling that's there. This game is about listening and responding. It's a game about the process of discovery. And that's a game I think that God is still playing. My mom could have just pointed and said, it's over there behind the couch or something like that. And that could have been it. But there's something that's lost in that. And I'm ever reminded that we live in a culture and time where people have zero patience, zero attention span, where they're really, really not wanting to work or spend a lot of time struggling to get somewhere or do something. But calling defies this kind of shortcut to the end mentality of instant gratification. And then being open and listening for God's direction is just has all the same elements as that silly game that my mom used to play with me when I was a kid. And it could be a joyful process for us. It really could be a joyful process if we come to God as a child who hasn't forgotten how to play. Well, let's start with that first thing that jumped out to me about this story of Peter's calling. And that thing is obedience. Even reluctant obedience is better than no obedience. I don't think it's as black and white as my sister's proverb teaches. Even reluctant obedience is still a step in the right direction. And reluctant obedience is sometimes better, it's always better than no obedience. And it's a prerequisite to understanding God's calling in our lives. It starts with obedience. We don't get the calling and then become obedient. We become obedient and then we discover the calling. Later we see Peter's obedience get a lot more radical. That he never would have gotten to the point of trusting Jesus with the unexpected if he hadn't first trusted Jesus with the expected, with his work, his 9 to 5 of fishing for fish. Remember, Peter had no reason to assume that Jesus knew anything, even the first thing about fishing. Jesus was a carpenter. Jesus was a teacher, a rabbi. Jesus was not a fisherman. And Peter was tired, right? Peter had fished all day and had nothing to show for it. But in listening and obeying, Peter suspended his judgment long enough. He was obedient long enough to be surprised by what God had for him. And Peter could have just ignored this stranger and gone home and put his feet up on the couch, right? That's the choice that Peter had. But instead, he did the hard work of trusting Jesus and listening to Jesus. And that's the first thing that calling really demands of us. And many people miss their calling because they miss that moment. Maybe they're in a hurry. Maybe they don't have enough patience. Maybe they don't really want to discover that thing that God has for them because they really just care about the things that they're doing and they're wanting in their lives. And Peter was complaining, he basically said to God, to Jesus, hey, I've been fishing all day and I don't really want to do this. But he still did what Jesus asked him to do. And I think complaining on the journey with God as your plans are changed is one thing. But giving excuses and walking away is quite another. We might have the same exact words coming out of our mouth sometimes. But it matters not what those words that we say are, it matters where our feet are pointing. And it matters whether we have the boldness and the confidence and the trust to take that step in the right direction. And that first small act of reluctant obedience was a crucial part of preparing Peter to hear about God's plan for his life. God's call to an uncommon life that was far different from sitting on a boat and searching after fish. And it's the first step to recognizing who Jesus is and our need for him. Peter said, I'm such a sinful person, right? He finally came to the point of recognizing his need for Jesus, his need to do something different with his life. And reluctant obedience sometimes is that first big crack in that dam of holding back what God has for our lives, of knowing God's plan, of letting God's power work through us. And when you recognize Jesus and how much we need him, then we can move to recognizing our dreams and our plans and recognizing maybe that they might actually be a little bit too small. That perhaps we were made for serving God in ways that we haven't figured out yet. And that God is creating a thirst in us that only God himself can satisfy. So no doubt Peter spent a lot of time out there dreaming of this catch of fish that he found that day. That's the dream of the fisherman. To go out on the water and have so many fish that you can't even bring them all in. To have so many fish and all the wealth that they represented. And God gave him that only to call him away from him. Only to get his attention and call him away on an unexpected journey. And when Peter left his net and walked away, that was the last thing that you would expect a fisherman to do. His net was full. To turn your back on all that abundance and walk away to follow Jesus on a path of uncertainty, that's something that normal people don't do, right? That's not the common way. That's the uncommon way. And you can forget normal when it comes to following Jesus. Jesus might upset your life completely. And so God fulfilled Peter's simple dream, and he did it so that Peter could see that he was made for so much more. But however we get to that point, seeking and calling has built within it us not just coming to the point of seeing where God's plan and our plans conflict, but of letting God win, letting God's plan have its way in us. And when we do that, amazing things can begin to happen. Now, Peter's catch was enormous, but it wasn't just affecting him. It says in the story that James and John, the sons of Zebedee, saw what happened to Peter. They saw how his reluctant obedience had brought something amazing into their life. And that part showed them something about the call that Jesus had for them, too. It wasn't just about Peter. I heard that there's this trap that they use in like South America and other places, well, places where they have coconuts. You may have heard of this trap before, but the trap, they take a coconut and they basically drill some holes in it and tie it to a tree. And then they drill a small hole in the coconut that's big enough for a monkey to get his hand through the hole. And then they put rice inside that coconut. And this is what happens. The monkeys see the coconut, they reach in there and they grab the rice. And when they make that fist, they can't pull their fist right back out of the coconut. And monkeys are stubborn and greedy, and they would sooner starve to death, some of them, than pull their hand back out of the hole, even though all they would have to do is let go of the rice and walk away. And obviously, the moral of this story is don't be like that monkey, right? Don't grab a hold of the net and refuse to let go, because if we do that, we're going to miss following after Jesus. And sometimes I think we do the same thing. That we do it differently. Maybe it's a prison of our own making, right? A prison with that's unlocked, but we're staying there ultimately because we want what's in those nets. We want our dreams more than we want God's dreams for us. And ultimately, when we do that, we're making a foolish choice to turn our back on this great adventure that God has for us. Because we think that our dreams and the limited dreams that they are worth sticking around for. But it's only through obedience that we get to the point where we can hear what God's call is for our lives and we can begin the business of answering that call. It doesn't mean that we're home free at that point. It doesn't mean that we have arrived, not by a long shot. And Peter probably had no idea what the heck fishing for people would really entail, what that would look like. Peter finally got to that point that he was ready to listen to Jesus. He was ready to let go of his net and take Jesus as his teacher and follow him. I think one of the biggest problems in the American church and in our church today is that we just care about bringing people before Jesus, and then we suddenly stop everything after that point. We just want to hear that someone's ready for Jesus, and we want to tell them about Jesus, and then we just drop the ball. It's like, okay, you're ready for Jesus? Well, here he is. Okay, I don't know what to do now. I'm out of here. And I think it's great to take that first step on the journey with Jesus. But the Peter that we see here and the Peter that we see at the end of the Gospels, the Peter that we see in the book of Acts is a lot different than the Peter that we see here at the very beginning of his journey. And we could ask, well, what happened? And I think, obviously, the resurrection happened. Otherwise, Peter would have just gone home, gone back to his life of fishing, as I talk about in an article that I wrote this month. But Peter spent quite a bit of time following Jesus and learning from him. And if you look at the story, what are the first words that Jesus says to Peter after Peter finally comes to that point of letting go of his net? He says, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." And there's a lot in that short sentence. There's a lot of things in there. First of all, following Jesus has uncertainty to it. It requires trust. It requires us to figure out how we can walk with Jesus where the rubber meets the road. And a lot of people struggle with change, and probably everybody struggles with change. But make no mistake, following Jesus requires change. And with that change will come fear, a fear of the unknown. That's just part and parcel with answering our calling. But when that first footprint makes its contact with the trail that Jesus is walking on, we start following Jesus toward a really uncommon life. And we learn what it means to put our trust in Jesus. The way of Jesus is a journey, and it's just as much an inward journey as an outward journey. It's a journey that will bring us face to face with our fears and seeing how those things control us. It's a journey of listening to the voice of Jesus that's telling us not to be afraid. And finally, we're like Peter, we can learn finally what our calling really means and where our obedience can begin to deepen. Jesus told Peter that he was on a mysterious journey, a journey of fishing for people with Jesus. And that, if that sounds strange to us, it's a strange metaphor for us, but I think it was a metaphor that could speak to Peter and where he was at. Imagine how it would sound to him. I mean, is that going to require netting people and dragging them away? Is it going to require fish hooks, How does this whole fishing for people thing work? Fishing for people is an entirely different line of work, but it's Peter's calling, and it's part of the calling of the church, each and every one of us in its way, to work with God, to bring people before Jesus and help them to see what he has for them, and the plan and the call that he has. The church has something called the Great Commission, co-missioning with God. That's what the church is supposed to be about. And fishing isn't such a simple thing. Like, I had a couple jobs as a dishwasher or factory worker where it was really simple, You just stand here and you move this from here to there. Fishing isn't like that at all. It's not simple. It's not the clearly defined process that we hope it is. It's not always super efficient. You could have, like Peter, have a bad day and not catch anything. Fishing takes skills. It takes going out to where the fish are. It takes skills to get out where the fish are. It takes work to pull up that net. It takes work to go out and drag somebody back from drowning off in the ocean back to the shore where Jesus is. And I believe that this thing is so important. It's so important for the church that it's worth doing badly to start. And if we wait for things to be perfect, they may never be. And even if they are perfect, How long do you think that's really going to last? We live in a messy world. What matters far more is obedience and taking the time to listen and obey. And I think this will shake us up a little bit, like riding on the ocean, but each of us in our way, we're made for a place out there on the high seas, fishing for people with Jesus, doing the work that Jesus has for us. And we're all different. We each have something different that we bring to the mix, that we bring to Jesus' table. Once, Northwest Yearly Meeting back home had a restructuring of all the committees. They laid down all their committees and they started them over. And at this time, there was an invitation out there for anybody who wanted to get involved in certain committees. And I had a heart for the youth and young adult of Northwest Yearly Meeting, and so I was there at the first few meetings as they completely restructured Northwest Yearly Meeting. And I didn't stay on that committee very long, but while I was there, I got to see that there was this big problem in the church of young adults that would go off to college or whatever, and that many of them weren't coming back. That the faith and the way that the church had tried to prepare them was not effective, and that they were leaving the church in droves. And this was part of how I discovered my calling. It was God in His way called me to Barclay and to George Fox and ultimately to here. And it's all because of this calling. It's all because of this question that I found when I was talking about the youth and young adults and the complexities of trying to reach out to them. And I just want to admit here that I'm greatly humbled by trying to answer this call. It hasn't gone exactly like I'd hoped. But it's worth doing badly. So one of the young adults asked me the other day what my vision for the young adults was. And I was kind of taken aback by it. And the more that I think about it this morning, the more I think I don't really have a vision for the young adults. I have a vision for the church to be a place that helps young adults find their calling and empowers them to walk with Jesus, that we would be a church that walks with some of these young adults as they figure that process out of listening to Jesus and finding their place in service in what He's doing. I don't have a vision for the young adults. I have a vision for the church being a place where young adults can thrive. That's not the same thing. I wish I would have been able to say that when they asked me, but in reflecting on it, that's where I'm at today. And all of it goes back to this calling that I felt that Jesus has put in my life. And some of what I'm doing is probably pretty terrible. It doesn't work like I thought. But I know that that's what I'm supposed to be doing. That's why Jesus brought me here. And I know for sure that this is a part of my calling, and that it's Jesus who has made and given me this calling. And sometimes that's enough to just get me through as I try to muddle my way of trying to do it badly until I can figure out how to do it well. And the more that I have my fears and my foibles and my failures, the more I learn how to trust Jesus. And it's my belief that God has a calling for everyone. And that there is for you that one burning question out there that you can't just help but wrap your whole life around. For me, it was the question of the youth and young adults of the church, and how the church was not reaching and connecting with them. That was part of something that God had used to call me here, to call me everywhere I've gone for the last 9 years. And the church has a mission. It has a general mission. But with that mission, we each have a specific piece of the puzzle that is our calling. And like Peter, we face a choice between whether we're going to pursue what God has for us or whether we're going to settle for our own hopes and dreams. And we each have the option of going home frustrated, doing earthly work, or joining with God in the heavenly work that He calls His church to do. And like my mother playing that game, I think we have to play that hide and seek a little bit. But it's worth the seeking. He's not trying to trick us and lead us the wrong way. God wants to play a part in our process of discovery. And ultimately, the big question for us is, do we want to play our part? We don't have to have all the answers before we can get started. And God might be redefining some major things about our lives. I used to be a builder. Now I'm building the church in a sense. God can use wherever we are and whatever we've done for His glory. He's in the business of taking fishermen like Peter and changing the whole game on them. And also of using what we bring to the table for something amazing, if we're willing to work with Him. But often it all starts with reluctant obedience that leads to stronger obedience and moving in the right direction. It can lead us to recognizing how much we need Jesus and finding the thing that we were made for and how we fit into God's plan. It can lead us beyond our short-sightedness. It can lead us through facing our fears and trusting Jesus on the journey. But the Jesus way calls us to leave the comfort of our boats. It calls us to leave behind the weight of our nets. We'll never discover God's call if we aren't first open to giving God both of our ears and all of our heart, and have the courage to take that first baby step toward obedience. And calling is a calling to work, to a vocation, not a vacation. If we expect a vacation instead of a vocation, we're going to be sorely disappointed, and we're going to walk away from Jesus' path disillusioned and frustrated. But it is a calling to do meaningful work with God, to work on an adventure with God, to work in ways that fits our hands like a glove fits a hand. And God is calling, and some of that calling is mysterious. But I believe that Scripture gives us some limits to what this mystery is about. It's limited to God's plan, not our plan. It's limited to the place of our service in the larger mission of Christ Church, not merely to do the things that our plans and our dreams for our own lives would have us do. And there are points where we simply need to trust Jesus and walk through our fears and let our plans be changed by God's plan. Calling is our lived response to doing what we were made for. And it's humbly being obedient to our best understanding of how God is directing us. And it all starts with obedience, sometimes with weak obedience. But God calls out to each of us. And just like Peter, we have to start wherever we are and leave behind whatever it is that's holding us back from following in the direction that Jesus is going. So I can tell you one thing, that just because it sounds simple doesn't mean it's easy. But I can promise you it will be worth it if you take that first step of obedience. And it might lead on an adventure far beyond where you would have thought you would ever be, doing things that you never imagined you would ever do, and that you would do it in a way that thirst that God has created in your life is satisfied and helps you as you walk with Jesus in faithfulness. So as we go into our time of open worship, I just want you to think about that calling. There is, I think, that question out there for each of us. And maybe you've found that, and maybe you can help people see what that looks like for you. Maybe you haven't found it yet, and you're still looking. Maybe you're still just, I think I heard a little bit warmer this way from God one time. Wherever you are in the journey, the church is supposed to be a place where we help you listen to God and find your place. And that's what my heart is. And if there's anything I can do to help you with that, please come and talk with me. But first, let's listen for God's Spirit to move and listen for that still small voice that might be telling us about the calling that God has for us.